We have Congresswoman from Arizona, Yasamin Ansari. She is the first Iranian-American Democrat in Congress, and it's nice to talk with you again. As you know, just over 2 weeks in now, 13 American military dead, 1 million people displaced, U.S. allies in the region defending Iranian attacks, a new hard-line supreme leader, global oil prices skyrocketing. The list goes on, but what is your assessment of this war today?
As I have always said, I don't believe that Donald Trump had either good intentions or any sort of coherent plan or strategy when it comes to the war with Iran. It has been catastrophic to see the impacts and the way that this has impacted Americans, whether they be service members, whether it be Americans stranded abroad who had a very difficult time leaving the countries that they were in the Middle East as Iran was retaliating. Now we're seeing, as reported by Reuters, thousands of Marines being sent to the Middle East, which indicates that the Trump administration is considering ground troops, which is not what any American wants. And we are seeing the economic impacts of this not well thought out war. Here in Arizona just today, the prices at the pump are close to $5 a gallon. And I'm hearing from my constituents about their fear about a potential draft and escalation of this war, but also what the cost is here. People cannot afford rent. People cannot afford health care. The Trump administration is actively ripping away Medicaid and food assistance from people and still cannot give any American a real answer as to why we are in this war and what the plan and the off-ramp and the end game is to any of this. Meanwhile, you have Iranian people who have already suffered horrendous massacres by the Islamic Republic. They were killed by the tens of thousands earlier in January. Donald Trump, of course, promised them that help is on the way. What I have seen from these military strikes does not look like real help or real strategy or a plan to bring about any sort of democratic transition in Iran. On day one, Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration committed a war crime by bombing a school where over 170 school children were murdered. Over 1,200 Iranian civilians have been killed. There's now been escalation in Lebanon where hundreds of people have been killed. This is so out of hand, and we need the Trump administration to very quickly figure out what the plan is to end this war and make sure no more lives are harmed anywhere.
I want our viewers to know that your family fled Iran in 1979 during the revolution. What went through your mind hearing that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the early hours of this war? Because with his son now replacing his father as supreme leader, what's changed in the culture and power ruling Iran? And what does this mean for Trump and his goal of regime change?
I want to be very clear. My parents fled this regime. I have had family members brutally murdered by the Islamic Republic. My grandfather was in prison. That's why my mom was sent here when she was a teenager by herself to flee, as it was getting worse during the Iran-Iraq war. But what we're seeing from the Trump administration is not a plan for liberation. I was very happy when, of course, the supreme leader was killed, as were many Iranians inside and outside of the country. There was a lot of celebration. Now, I think the feelings are more mixed. You will see, with the reporting that does come out of the country, and I do want people to remember that the regime is very brutal when it comes to repressing not just any sort of opposition, but they shut down the internet. So they often shut down the internet. They did that during the massacre. They're doing it now. So it's hard to get accurate information out of Iran. But there is a widespread of feeling. Some people are scared that the Trump administration will pull out and they are now left with the younger Ayatollah Khamenei, who will likely be more brutal and more hardline. Some are rightfully scared now, seeing that bombs are falling everywhere on cultural sites, on civilian infrastructure, on the oil refinery plants that has now led to toxic pollution throughout Tehran, which will likely cause cancer in the next 6 months in much of the population. People will be getting sick. I think there are a lot of people who are recognizing that perhaps the United States and Israel do not have the best interest for the future of the Iranian people. Listen to Donald Trump's words when he talks about this. He either will say he wants to cut a deal with somebody within the regime, or that he is going to do some sort of Venezuela-style operation. I have been told in briefings that a democratic transition is not part of this mission. So for me, it's challenging because I want the best for the Iranian people, but I have lived this Trump administration, and Donald Trump does not have good intentions or does not want democracy for the American people, let alone the Iranian people.
You mentioned the tragedy of that strike on the school. Let's listen to Pete Hegseth, who on Friday said CENTCOM has appointed an officer from outside to investigate the preliminary report findings that the U.S. was responsible. Take a listen.
There's only one entity in this conflict between us and Iran that never targets civilians. Literally never targets civilians. I look at the process that's used on dynamic strikes or on boat strikes and others. We have a very high fidelity process in that case. So we don't target, Iran does. We will investigate, and we'll get to the truth, and we'll share it when we have it.
Is that a satisfactory response for you? I mean, what questions do you have for the defense secretary?
Well, myself and Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs and Congressman Jason Crow have led a letter of more than 120 members of Congress demanding an immediate and independent investigation of these strikes. I do not believe Donald Trump. I think that there has already been very credible reporting from the New York Times and many others with images of the shot and the weapons that were used. But we need an investigation and we need answers. And the fact that this happened on the first day of this war is devastating. War crimes of this magnitude, whether it be in the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq, would have been considered massive, massive, massive scandals at the time after years of being in those conflicts. We have not seen something like this. And they've continued to target hospitals. They've continued to target schools. They've continued to target, again, civilian infrastructure. They hit a water plant that is going to impact the ability of clean water getting to 30 villages in Iran. To me, this looks like a mission to really harm the civilian population of this country, to destroy the country. I've also written letters about the reporting that's come out to say that the CIA was considering arming separatist groups. One commonality you can find among Iranians everywhere is the importance of territorial integrity of the country. And this is a population of 90 million people, a very diverse country with a wide array of religions that are followed, different ethnic backgrounds. It is very worrisome to think that one potential consequence of this war could be civil war and chaos for decades to come.
The president is suggesting he may end the war soon, telling Axios anytime he wants to end, it will end. You've called this war illegal. You've made a case right there. Should he end it now, or do the risks of pulling out quickly outweigh the costs of staying in it?
The president needs to present an off-ramp and a plan. Again, we still do not even know what the intention of the war was. One day it is to obliterate their nuclear program that we allegedly obliterated last summer. The next day it's about missiles and drones. The next day it's about the Navy. One day it's about regime change. He changes that. He needs to offer a plan. The fact that, again, thousands of Marines are on their way to the Middle East is terrifying to the American people. No more American lives should be put at risk. The escalation right now that's happening with the closing of the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's retaliatory responses, attacks on Israel, attacks on U.S. bases throughout the Middle East. Dubai has been attacked. Lebanon is being struck by Israel. I mean, this is ballooning so out of control so quickly that it is vital that the war ends as quickly as possible and that there is a plan by this administration presented to the American people about how he intends to de-escalate and use diplomacy to amend, all of the damage that has been done. The fact that, there's so much I can point to. The fact that the pretty, far right leadership of Italy, who tends to, always be aligned with Donald Trump, has distanced herself and say that they cannot get behind this war. I mean, we're losing credibility as the United States of America so rapidly, and the damage will, again, be there for many years to come.
One last question. Do you still have family in Iran? And if so, are you able to hear from them?
I have family. Yes, I have older relatives. My mom's aunt is 90 years old. She lives in Tehran. She has not been able to get a hold of her for weeks now. I have cousins there. My mom has close friends there. It's been very, very difficult. The internet shutdown that the regime constantly uses as a tactic is really makes it challenging for people around the world. So people don't know if their family members are safe. And I've repeated this as well. There's legislation in Congress that would actually support internet freedom for the Iranian people. There are bills and funding that could be appropriated to make sure that Iranians have access to internet. This is why I do not trust the Trump administration. If he wanted to help the Iranian people, that is a tangible step the United States government could take right now to get Iranians online, to support direct-to-cell connectivity, and to get people access to information and being able to communicate to the outside world. So that's my call on the Trump administration today. Please make sure there's internet access for the people of Iran. Please let us know what you're doing to protect civilian life. Please present a plan to make sure there's an off-ramp so that Iran does not end up with a more repressive regime than they already had when this war began.
Representative Yasamin Ansari, thank you so much. Very powerful conversation. Thank you. Improvising a war.